Let us continue our reading of the Tannisho episodes 11 to 14, directly from the collected works of Shinran. Part 2. On Departures from the Teaching of Shinran. 11. On the matter of confusing practices of the Nembutsu, who are ignorant of even a single letter, by challenging them, to which do you entrust yourself in saying the Nembutsu, the inconceivable working of the vow or that of the name? Without clarifying fully these two kinds of inconceivable working, we must carefully consider this matter, and reach a correct understanding of it. Through the inconceivable working of the vow, Amida Buddha devised the name. To begin with, then, it is through Amida's design, that we come to say the Nembutsu with the belief that, saved by the inconceivable working of the Tathagata's great vow of great compassion, we will part from birth and death. This being realized, our calculation is not in the least involved, and so, in accord with the primal vow, we will be born in the true fulfilled land. That is, when we entrust ourselves to the inconceivable working of the vow, taking it as essential, the inconceivable working of the name is also included, the inconceivable working of the vow, and that of the name are one, with no distinction whatever. Next, people who discriminate good and evil acts, and consider them aids or hindrances to birth, interposing their own calculation, do not entrust themselves to the inconceivable working of the vow, and, striving to do acts that result in birth with their own designs, they make the Nembutsu, they say, their own practice. People with such an attitude do not entrust themselves to the inconceivable working of the name either. Even though they lack the mind of entrusting, they will be born in the borderland, and land of sloth, the castle of doubt, or the womb palace, and in the end will attain birth in the fulfilled land by virtue of the vow that beings ultimately attain birth. This is the inconceivable power of the name. Since it is also none other than the inconceivable working of the vow, the two are wholly one. 12. On the assertion that for practitioners who do not read the sutras and commentaries, and engage in study, birth is not settled. This statement must be declared hardly worth mentioning. All the sacred writings that clarify the significance of the truth and reality of other power, state that one who entrusts oneself to the primal vow, and says the Nembutsu attains Buddhahood. Apart from this, what learning is essential for birth? Indeed, the person confused about this should by all means engage in study, and understand the significance of the primal vow. But nothing is more to be pitied than failure to understand the fundamental intent of the sacred teachings, even though one reads and studies the sutras and commentaries. The name is meant to be easy to say, for the person unfamiliar with even a single character, and ignorant of the lines of discourse in the sutras and commentaries, hence it is called easy practice. It is the path of sages that takes learning to be essential, it is called difficult practice. As for those who engage in study with wrong intentions, dwelling in thoughts of fame and profit, is there not the authoritative passage, I wonder if their birth in the next life is really settled? At present, people of the sole practice of the Nembutsu, and those of the path of sages, initiate disputes over the teaching, each claiming their own way to be superior, and those of others inferior. As they do so, enemies of the Dharma emerge, and slander of the Dharma is committed. Does this not finally result in abusing and bringing destruction to the teaching they themselves follow? Suppose that all other schools joined together in declaring, the Nembutsu is for the sake of worthless people, that teaching is shallow and vulgar. Even then, without the slightest argument, one should reply when foolish beings of inferior capacity like ourselves, persons ignorant of even a single letter, entrust themselves to the vow, they are saved. Since we accept and entrust ourselves to this teaching, for us it is the supreme Dharma, though for those of superior capacity, it might seem utterly base. Even though other teachings may be excellent, since they are beyond our capacity, they are difficult for us to put into practice. The fundamental intent of the Buddhas is nothing but freedom from birth and death for all, ourselves and others included, so you should not obstruct our practice of the Nembutsu. If one responds without rancor thus, what person will do one harm? Moreover, there is an authoritative passage that states, where disputation takes place, blind passions arise. The wise keep their distance. Further, the late master said, Shakyamuni taught that there would be both people who entrust themselves to this teaching, and people who abuse it. By the fact that I have entrusted myself fully to it, and there are others who abuse it, I realize that the Buddha's words are indeed true. Hence, I realize all the more clearly that my birth is indeed firmly settled. If there were none who abused the teaching, then surely we would wonder why there are those who entrust but none who abuse it. This is not to say the Nembutsu necessarily must be slandered. I merely speak of the fact that the Buddha, knowing beforehand that there would be both those who trust and those who slander, taught this so people would have no doubts. Thus were his words. These days, however, people seem to engage in learning to put a stop to criticism by others, making ready to devote themselves wholly to debate and argument. If one studies more and more, one realizes Amida's fundamental intent, and grows in awareness of the immensity of the compassionate vow, so that one can explain, to those who anxiously wonder how birth is possible, for the wretched people like themselves, that the primal vow does not discriminate, as to whether one's mind is good or evil, pure or defiled. Only then, is there meaning in being a scholar. But to intimidate a person, who happens to say the Nembutsu in accordance with the primal vow, without any forethought, insisting that one must have learning, is the act of a demon obstructing the Dharma, of a foe of the Buddha. Not only do such people themselves lack shinjin of other power, but further they confuse others with mistaken thoughts. One should cautiously fear that one may be going against the late master's intent. Further, one should grieve if one is not in accord with Amida's primal vow. 13. On the assertion, people who are unafraid of committing evil because of the inconceivable working of the primal vow are in fact impudently presuming upon the vow and therefore will not attain birth. This is a statement of one who doubts the primal vow, and fails to understand the influence of good and evil karma of past lives. Good thoughts arise in us, through the prompting of good karma from the past, and evil comes to be thought and performed, through the working of evil karma. The late master said, knowing that every evil act done, even as slight as a particle on the tip of a strand of rabbit's fur, or sheep's wool, has its cause in past karma. Further, the master once asked, Yuien-Bo, do you accept all that I say? Yes, I do, I answered. Then will you not deviate from whatever I tell you? He repeated. I humbly affirmed this. Thereupon he said, now, I want you to kill 1,000 people. If you do, you will definitely attain birth. I responded, though you instruct me thus, I'm afraid it is not in my power to kill even one person. Then why did you say that you would follow whatever I told you? He continued, by this you should realize that if we could always act as we wished, then when I told you to kill 1,000 people in order to attain birth, you should have immediately done so. But since you lack the karmic cause inducing you to kill even a single person, you do not kill. It is not that you do not kill, because your heart is good. In the same way, a person may not wish to harm anyone, and yet end up killing 100 or 1,000 people. Thus, he spoke of how we believe that, if our hearts are good, then it is good for birth, and if our hearts are evil, it is bad for birth, failing to realize that it is by the inconceivable working of the vow that we are saved. There was, in those days, a person who had fallen into wrong views. He asserted that since the vow was made to serve the person who had committed evil, one should purposely do evil as an act for attaining birth. As rumors of misdeeds gradually spread, Shinran wrote in a letter, "Do not take liking to poison just because there is an antidote." This was in order to put an end to that wrong understanding. It by no means implies that evil can obstruct one's attainment of birth. He also said, if it were only by observing precepts and upholding rules, that we should entrust ourselves to the primal vow, how could we ever gain freedom from birth and death? Even such wretched beings as ourselves, on encountering the primal vow, come indeed to presume upon it. But even so, how could we commit evil acts, without any karmic cause in ourselves? The Master further stated, "For those who make their living drawing nets or fishing in the seas and rivers, and those who sustain their lives hunting beasts or taking fowl in the fields and mountains, and those who pass their lives conducting trade or cultivating fields and paddies, it is all the same. If the karmic cause so prompts us, we will commit any kind of act." These days, however, one finds people making a show of themselves as seekers for the afterlife, posting notices at Nembutsu practice halls saying that those who have committed such and such acts may not enter, as though only good persons should say the Nembutsu. Are not people who do this indeed outwardly expressing signs of wisdom, goodness, or diligence, while inwardly embracing falsity? Even the evil we commit while presuming upon the vow, occurs through the prompting of past karma. Thus, other power lies in entrusting ourselves wholly to the primal vow, while leaving both good and evil to karmic recompense. The Essentials of Faith alone states, "Do you know the power Amida possesses, when you say, that because you are a being of karmic evil, you cannot be saved? Since you have a heart that presumes upon the primal vow, the mind of entrusting yourself to other power becomes all the more firmly settled. If you entrusted yourself to the primal vow, only after completely ridding yourself of karmic evil and blind passions, then there would be no presuming upon the vow. But to rid yourself of blind passions is to become a Buddha, and for one who is already a Buddha, the vow that arose from the 5 kalpas of profound thought would be to no purpose. People who admonish others against presuming upon the primal vow themselves, appear to be possessed of blind passions and defilements. Does not this condition itself imply presuming upon the vow? What kind of evil is meant by presuming upon the vow and what kind is not? Rather, is not this entire line of argument the product of immature thinking? 14. On the assertion, you should believe that the grave karmic evil binding you to birth and death for 8 billion kalpas is eradicated through a single utterance of the name. It is asserted, based on the Contemplation Sutra, that there are persons of the 10 transgressions and 5 grave offenses who, although they have passed their lives without saying the Nembutsu, at the time of death, urged by the instruction of a good teacher, come to say it for the first time. In one utterance 8 billion kalpas of karmic evil are eradicated, or in 10 utterances, 10 times 8 billion kalpas of grave karmic evil are eradicated, and thus they attain birth. It appears that one utterance and 10 utterances are taught in order to make us know the gravity of the 10 transgressions and 5 grave offenses. Those who assert the above, however, speak only of the benefit of eradicating evil. This falls far short of the teaching that we have accepted. For by virtue of being shone upon by Amida's light, we received I am and light Shinjin when the one thought moment of entrusting arises within us. Hence, already in that instant Amida takes us into the stage of the truly settled, and when our lives end, all our blind passions and obstructions of evil being transformed, we are brought to realize insight into the non-origination of all existence. Thus the Nembutsu that we say throughout a lifetime with the thought, if it were not for this compassionate vow, how could such wretched evildoers as ourselves gain emancipation from birth and death, should be recognized as entirely the expression of our gratitude for the benevolence and our thankfulness for the virtuous working of the Tathagata's great compassion. To believe that each time you say the name your karmic evil is eradicated is nothing but to strive to attain birth by eliminating your karmic evil through your own efforts. In that case, you can attain birth only by being diligent in the Nembutsu to the very point of death, for every single thought you have throughout the course of your life is a fetter binding you to birth and death. But since our karmic recompense restricts us, we may, meeting with various unforeseen accidents or being tormented by the pain of sickness, reach the end of our lives without dwelling in right-mindedness. In such circumstances, saying the name is difficult. How then is the karmic evil committed in that final interval to be eradicated? If it is not eliminated, is not birth unattainable? If we entrust ourselves to Amida's vow that grasps and never abandons us, then even though unforeseen circumstances, we commit an evil act and die without saying the Nembutsu at the very end, we will immediately realize birth in the Pure Land. Moreover, even if we do say the name at the point of death, it will be nothing other than our expression of gratitude for Amida's benevolence, entrusting ourselves to the Buddha more and more as the very time of enlightenment draws near. The desire to eradicate one's karmic evil through saying the name arises from the heart of self-power. It is the basic intent of people who pray to be in a state of right-mindedness when their lives end. It therefore reveals an absence of Shinjin that is other power. Here ends part 2 of the Tannisho. Part 3 of the Tannisho, episodes 15 to 18, will continue, to be read in the next chapter. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.